Okay, so I watched the recording of last week's meeting, so it looks like between Jeff and Ian, you guys finished up the definitions, right? And let's see, uh, how do you pronounce his name? Manjo? I think he was there as well. So the definitions are all kind of done, correct?
I think
Yeah, I
they're
think there
I think they're
was.
good enough.
Yeah. So what I've done is I have checked in, and I'll share the let's see. I made a check-in like 5 minutes ago. Um, that includes, let's see, come on. Where's my doc? Doc. Recent. Descriptions. Where's my share button? Okay, so I went through this entire list and I've added all these definitions to the actual JSON schema, and I've checked that in. So the description of the JSON schema now aligns with what us as a group have kind of decided on as these are the descriptions that we're going to use for these fields. I did run into a couple questions. So, and I'm going to go through them first, and then we can come back to whichever one we want to revisit first. In the schema, there is a field under attestations called summary. Now, I don't know if that is missing from the spreadsheet or if that is something that was carried over from the schema that maybe we got rid of, but it's a difference. The other thing that we need to do is kind of figure the evidence type out. And then for people, I've checked this out, and I've checked, put a line through the statement as well. I'm assuming that both of these, the names have changed on these fields during the last call. So I've went ahead and made those changes to the schema as well. So in the schema, this is now referred to as people, not contact. And this is now referred to as statement rather than text. So those changes are also in. This is also done. So signatories is also checked in, and they align to the definitions here. However, I wanted to also revisit this because right now we've got, you can either do a kind of a JSON signature, or you can do an external reference with an organization. That's the choice. I think that's the choice, right? My question was, should this be an external reference or should this be an attachment type? Because you can both attach, well, you can either inline the attachments or refer externally to the attachments, which is similar but different from an external reference. So we need to revisit that as well. So we've got that, we've got the type, and it looks like we've got to revisit the predicate, the choice of a noun there, and this summary. So those are the four things it looks like we need to revisit. Any preference?
Start at the top.
What's that? Start at the top?
Might as well.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So let's see. We have this thing called summary in the attestations object in the schema, and it wasn't on the this thing. And I don't know if that was an oversight by one of us making this, or if we should have removed it from the schema, and I just didn't do it.
I thought we added that as just a short write-up of what this set of attestations is all about. Is that,
Yeah. And maybe we added that after this list was created too.
yeah,
Um, all right.
I mean,
Well,
the summary could say something like, this is a combined set of requirements from, NIST 853 and PCI standard or something.
right. All right. So let's give this thing a description. What's a description of a summary?
Hang on, I'll ask ChatGPT.
A short description of the scope of the attestations,
The short.
the short.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yes. The short description of the scope.
That's what I was thinking. Or a short description. I don't want to say summarizing the attestation.
A short description summarizing the attestation.
Explaining the
Explain
Well,
it.
the definition of summary is a brief statement or account of the main points of something, which actually I think works pretty well since this is a collection of points. So maybe we just use that.
Oh yeah, explaining the main points of these attestations.
Yeah. I was just joking with a Google search, but it actually came up with something useful.
All right. Is that what we want to use as a description for summary?
Works for me. Next.
Okay. Okay. Summary. Boom. It is added to the schema. Okay. Good. One down. Okay. Evidence type. C valid 1.6 at the stations.json.
Hmm.
Let's see. Type, was it?
Yeah, I remember this. When we brought this up, I had suggested that we follow something like the in toto predicates to make it extendable. So that we weren't just using an enum, because the enum seemed to not be flexible enough. So that I think is where this came from originally. But the idea was just kind of like, well, if we're talking about an evidence type, there was an enum originally of I think 5 values. And I think we came up with 1 or 2 on the fly that were also potentially valid types. And so it was the conversation was, well, how do we just make this a more extendable type of type list rather than a set enum in the standard? I'm surprised
Let's
I remembered
see.
that. That was like a month and a half ago or 2 months ago.
I know. I think it might have been checked in on the 1.5. Let's see. It's probably under here would be my guess. And what was it on? It was under
Type. It was
declarations, evidence type. Evidence
type audit
type.
observation.
There we
test
go.
result. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So the pipes there, I think, made us think that it was an enum originally. If
Right.
those are just examples and it's a free text field, I mean, that kind of works, but it's not exceedingly, I don't know how useful that would be if it's just text, like a free text field.
Yeah, I mean, we could do something like, I mean, we can certainly make it an enum and keep on extending it. Or we could use CycloneDX properties for this, and then put the definition of the properties in the official taxonomy. So that audit observation, these are all kind of expected values, even though it's technically not an enum. And that would allow us to keep on adding to it independent of the specification. I'm trying to figure out if there's anything outside of these, though. And I can't come up with anything right now.
It could be an interview, although I suppose that could fall under anecdote
Expert.
as well.
Expert interview.
Well, that's
Well,
assuming the person's an expert.
True, true.
I mean, that's why I would kind of say anecdote, right? Because even if it's an expert, it's still anecdotal evidence, right? It's not,
True.
it's a conversation with somebody. And that's why I'd argue like this type of a field can be very dangerous from that perspective too. Is it an anecdote? Is it an expert? If we're going to do an enum, we should have a definition of what each one of these is as
Yes.
well. So yeah.
Maybe anecdote and expert are too similar. I don't know. Jeff, from a legal perspective?
Anecdote and which one?
Anecdote versus expert.
No, expert could be anything the expert wants to say, right? One of the things they might relate is an anecdote, but like an anecdote could be related by a non-expert too.
Right.
I'm just looking up types of evidence, and there's a lot. Direct evidence, circumstantial evidence, physical evidence, forensic evidence, trace evidence, expert witness, testimony, digital evidence, documentary evidence, demonstrative evidence, character evidence, habit evidence, hearsay, corroborating evidence. I don't know, there's a bunch of others. I don't know if any of those, do any of those sound like something we might want to add?
Some of them sounded really interesting. Some of the other ones very legalese, but
I've talked about direct evidence versus indirect evidence for a long time. And like, to me, direct evidence is when you measure the software itself, like it's actually evidence about the thing that you're measuring. Indirect evidence is an order removed. It's like, if you're measuring something about the people that created the software, it's indirect. And I always make the point to say I have a strong preference for direct evidence, because I don't really believe indirect evidence. I've seen too many teams that have been trained in security that couldn't.
Well, somebody might
their way
submit
out
a
of a
piece.
bag.
Yeah, somebody might submit a piece of evidence being a policy, for example, right? The fact is that we have this policy. It is a piece of evidence, right? So
They do that all the time.
yeah. And like, okay,
whoop.
great, you got the policy. Now show me the metrics that show you actually do the policy, right?
Right.
But we should technically capture both, and there's no policy type in here either. So you could say that that's, you know, an anecdote, but it's not, it's a policy. That's why I kind of keep coming back here to saying, like, I think this really must be an extendable field. The other question is like, well, what is the goal of this field? Like, what are we hoping that people will be able to do with a type field on a piece of evidence? Are they going to be creating lists of all of the types of evidence, or grouping evidence by type? Like what's the functional goal of having the type here? What's its value? And if we have that conversation, maybe it'll help us figure out what we should do with the field, or how we should treat the field.
I really like the concept of direct versus indirect. It's kind of the easy button. And from a consumption perspective, it would provide almost immediate value, like out of the box.
Yeah, you have no direct evidence of something. Okay.
Right, exactly. For like breaking it down further, like what we have here, I think in several years' time, this could probably be useful. But again, out of the box, probably not.
What if we added another kind of type field? Like there's a general type, direct versus indirect, and then there's a specific type, like you could be indirect policy or something.
Yeah, I think that
Right.
there's also value in perhaps something like system generated, right? I mean, I guess you could say that that's direct evidence,
Yeah.
right? System generated also kind of means like it's been baked in. There's some checks and balances in there, right? There could even be system generated signed, right, for an additional guarantee of the evidence's validity. Right. So I think that that's why like this idea of type, I think could be very easily overloaded as well, which maybe is not something that we want to do. And if we do want to do something like direct versus indirect, maybe type's not the right word for it.
Another wrinkle that I'd love to throw in here is when I think of an argument for whether a security requirement has been met, I usually think about, and this is kind of targeted towards arguments about certain threats, but what I want to make sure is that the defenses are complete and correct and effective. And I don't know how to, like, those to me are really important pieces of evidence. You want to say, hey, the security mechanism is correct, and here's how I know because I tested it. You want to say it's effective because I know that it's been deployed in all the right places. I know that it's configured correctly, and you provide evidence of that. And then it's complete, meaning it's non-bypassable and tamper-proof.
So so if those are some of the guiding goals with this, don't we get that in the mapping where we say like, hey, this has been audited and reviewed, and yes, this is, or no, this isn't what it claims to be? So didn't we have assertions up in that space that was doing that, and then evidence here was just an array of literal just objects of evidence and not trying to ascertain its value, right?
That's fair. Yep.
The other thing though that you made me think of was maybe instead of type, we have source. Is this generated? Is this a first person witness of it? Is this a second order removed? But like source for where it came from, I think might be very valuable to help ascertain some of that. Because if it's a system generated thing as part of our process that's repeatable, then that has a high degree of trust. Versus if it's an anecdotal thing, it does not have a high degree of trust.
Although to be fair, you could have like the worst static analysis tool in the world.
Yeah, true.
It's totally automated. It's super fast, actually. It just produces garbage results.
Yeah, but I'd also counter with, if that's the requirement from a policy perspective and we meet the requirements, it's valid, right?
I couldn't hate that more, but
I absolutely hate it
too.
I 100% agree with you. I hate that, but that's reality in a lot of places.
So how like are you just adding a question here? Is author different from source here?
That's a good point.
Well, I just got into this argument on LinkedIn about the author minimum SBOM type. And I think in CycloneDX, an author can be a tool or a person, right?
Yeah.
They were flipping out because somebody made an SBOM that only had the tool in it. And they were like, well, it needs an author. NTIA says you have to have an author. I'm like, it's the tool. It's right fucking there. And it's just unwound over it. But yeah, I mean, here I think I don't know if that's exactly the same as source. It's pretty close.
From how I was thinking about it, I think it's a perfect match, and that's fine. And you can, if it's based on a tool and you trust the tool, then you know that it's a trustworthy piece of evidence. And if you don't trust the tool, then it's not a trustworthy piece of evidence. I think that's valid. So I guess we go.
In the SBOM side of things, we say authors and tools, and you could have one or both or none, I guess. I don't know if we want to parallel that here. It's a little, evidence is a little different than SBOM. Not SBOM's kind of like a kind of evidence to me.
So do we want to separate author from a system identity? So is that like when it's a system or a tool identity, we should have a separate field? Is that?
Well, author's an object. What's in that object? Do we have the ability to specify like if it's a human or a system?
Yeah.
Because if the author object has that, then I think we're totally fine. And we don't need to separate it. But if it doesn't, that would be a useful bit of information.
Sure. Author
checking now. Okay, so let's see, evidence. Let me just share my other window here. So evidence has the type, obviously, description, and the data, which allows you to attach or specify a URL to where it's at. Created expires author, which is a person. A reviewer is also a person.
Yeah, then I think that we're losing something very important there with whether it's system generated or not. Like what is the source of it? The author of the evidence is the person who's creating this blurb in there, but who's generating the evidence might be different. I don't know, that it feels like there's something missing here. And if that's what the type is, then that's valid. And maybe we should go back to that type conversation and say system generated is valid. Maybe that is a type that we want to include.
Right.
Or do we want to change the author definition to not be, a reference to a specific organizational contact, but rather a more generic reference to a entity, whether it's a person or a system? And does CycloneDX already have something like that we could reference?
Well, the author could be a person or a tool, I guess, a person or a component or a service, I guess. Because you could have an author that's also like, your AI overlord, I guess.
But what you just showed on the screen a second ago, though, was that it was referencing a specific person. Is that something that we could change? I guess I'm not quite getting the context of this doc here. Okay, so this is something that we can then change up.
Yeah. This is a schema that we're looking at. So
Okay.
obviously this isn't released yet. But
okay.
So we can make changes to this. That's what this process is.
Underneath,
so we could change this so that you could either do one of person, component, or service, for example. Or, I mean, realistically, I mean, you could have a reviewer, and maybe the reviewer is actually a third-party consultancy. And it's the consultancy that's the reviewer, not an individual person for the consultancy. So maybe we add organization in there too.
I thought that we had something else I thought that the reviewing of the evidence happened in the map, not at the evidence level. I thought that's where we were trying to make our assertions there. And it feels a little odd to have a reviewer asserting something on a piece of evidence if we're doing it elsewhere as well, if that makes sense. Yeah, the attestation map here. I thought that this is where we were saying the claim and the counterclaim. Wouldn't a review of a piece of evidence be a claim on the evidence, for example?
Right. Let's look at this.
Then again, that did say that it was for claims specifically.
Right. Where's my claims? Nothing. Let me go back to my 151. Let's see. Yeah, you don't have a person associated with the claim.
Yeah, we don't. Okay.
Person is associated with the evidence.
Okay. I just wanted to make sure on that one. And if can you go up to the map, the attestation map here as well, just so we can see there. It's a requirement, claim, counterclaim, conformance, mitigation strategy, confidence. The signature on that's on all of the mappings, not on an individual element in the map. Okay. So I guess I would kind of wonder, like, if we're making claims, why wouldn't we have the reviewer of that claim be up there in the claim rather than in the evidence itself? It seems like we're making our decisions and our assertions based on the claims and the map. So why would we have a reviewer of the evidence versus a reviewer of the claim or the evidence in the claim? Right. I guess that's kind of where I'm coming from mentally. I'm not sure that that's the right place for that.
Well, I think this gives you a little bit more granularity, because you could have different reviewers for different pieces of evidence, all supporting a given claim.
Okay. So we want to
you
be
had
able to
it-
support people reviewing evidence as well as people reviewing claims. Or actually, no, we don't support people reviewing claims at all right now. So
Right, it's derived from.
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah,
Okay.
this gives you a little bit more granularity. All right, so what do we want to do with type?
I was originally thinking again of doing a reference of some kind. You had mentioned the properties thing. I skimmed that a little bit, and it looks like that actually makes a good amount of sense, because it does become very extendable, and then it's just a question of what do we want to put in there. And then I think, to Jeff's point from earlier, maybe capturing an additional element of, is it firsthand or secondhand evidence, primary evidence or secondary, maybe. That might be an additional field rather than the type itself.
Right.
But again, type seems a little bit, it's a very generic thing here, and I'm not sure what the real goal of type is. If it's just a generic classification that we would want people to be able to group things into, then
call it classification.
and nobody's
I
ever
just-
debated classifications.
Right, exactly. I think the harder question is coming up with a noun for direct versus indirect, or first party, second party, whatever you want to call it.
Well, let's if we stick with the type for a second, we say that we want to make it a property, right? We could theoretically start with these properties.
Right.
Or we could use kind of like a more universal kind of JSON schema supports external references, right? in that way where you can just say, hey, this is of type that. And then we can make it nice and open-ended for folks. And then they can kind of decide what they want based on the URI that they provide for it.
Yeah, unfortunately, we also have to support protobuf, which I don't think has that concept.
Mm.
I'm not sure about XML. We might be able to figure something out, but yeah. Protobuf is widely used. Um,
How would it handle it if it was a property and that was versioned separately?
It would just be a string field. And your parsers would just have to know, for example, that, this is, CDX : attestations : whatever we call this thing, right? Audit observations, whatever. So you'd be looking for that particular pattern, and we can hard code that pattern expectation in the schema. We can do that for XML. We can do that for JSON. I don't know if you can do that on protobuf or not, but again, it ends up being a string. Yeah, you can't do that in protobuf. But it's basically just a string. And then for XML and JSON, it's going to do that pattern matching at the very beginning. I think you can do that. I think you can do, yeah, you can do that on XML.
Well, I guess why couldn't you just do that with a URI then too? If you have the URI for the type that it is, you know that it's just that type. It's not like we're changing it's just a category. We're not changing the actual contents of the object or anything like that.
Right.
It's literally just saying, hey, we're agreeing to use this taxonomy term that's centrally recorded here rather than anything else, right? Like, again, my experience is a little bit more with JSON schema. So like, they have just like a central schema registry of popular types that they use for things like organizations and stuff. And, having a schema registry like that, you could just, here's the URI to the thing that this actually is.
Yeah. Yeah, so for those that don't know, let me just pull it up real quick. Let's just go here real quick. And just do a search on taxonomy. So this is kind of the registration of the taxonomy. So if we go into, like, these are the different namespaces that are already registered by different organizations. They can have a location where that where their own namespace is registered. But like like for hardware devices, right? A lot of our hardware specific quote unquote fields is actually handled by the taxonomy. So things that we didn't necessarily want to bundle into the CycloneDX specification, at least not for now. We could do the same thing for these types as well. So as more and more attestations types become known, we can keep on adding to them.
Yeah, that feels like a pretty good fit. It's the same
Okay.
kind of functional goal as what I was talking about for sure.
Okay. All right. So let's add that in.
So,
Then
Steve, just a quick question there before
Yeah.
I need to hop off. So does that mean that somebody has to keep a central repository of all the types? I mean, it being
this
extensive,
is the central repository. This is it.
right? So what I'm saying is, if somebody has to include a type, they need to come in, register it before they can start using it. Is that how the process works?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
I mean,
right.
they could also just bring it up in their own world. Like, as long as they're not using one of these reserved namespaces, they can come up with their own namespace and do that too.
Yep.
So I mean, if we are thinking of this attestation as an intra-organization, or I guess the scenario would be intra, where you just use it internally in anything which is going external. Okay, all right.
And there's nothing saying that the org couldn't publish that out as well with it.
Right. Right.
We'll eventually make all this machine readable too. Right now,
Right.
it's just obviously in Markdown. But
Mhm.
the end goal is to have the entire taxonomy machine readable, so
Mhm.
that you can you'll eventually be able to have tools that will automatically be able to resolve things that have been registered and defined in the taxonomy.
Cool. Makes sense. Cool. Have to drop.
All right.
Thanks.
Okay. All right. Cheers.
Just a note for whenever that piece of work is done, I would highly recommend that we support custom resolver domains or targets as well with that. So like, it's great that there is one centralized truth there, but making sure that each org can have their own as well is would be very beneficial.
Yep. Yeah, we support that, but making that machine readable as well, that's going to be a little bit more challenging. I mean, putting our stuff in machine readable format, that's easy. Getting everybody else to do it, that's going to be a little bit more challenging, and having that then kept up to date. Okay. So
I think that definitely fixes this problem, though. It makes it extendable, which was the big concern, right? And then we just need to have the conversation about what actually goes in there. Like, what do we want the starting one to be?
yeah, let's come up with a description first, finalize the name of the field, come up with a description, and then we can start down the rabbit hole of trying to define the taxonomy. Sound good?
Yep.
Do we want to call it type, or do we want to call it something else?
We don't use the noun type anywhere else, do we?
Component
in
type.
this,
Yeah.
in the attestation stuff. I just want to make sure.
Oh, in the attestation stuff.
Yeah.
That's a great question. Assessor's type. Okay, that was revisiting in 1.7.
Evidence
No,
type
we
and
don't.
assessment type.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah, I would just want to make sure that we're consistent with it. And if we say that this is a type and it's going to be a property that links out, that if we use type anywhere else, I think it should be the same thing.
Right.
I think type does make sense, unless you wanted to say something like evidence property type instead. Make it a little bit more granular and specific, but
Property type.
I think type by itself is good as well.
Okay.
I'm open on that one. I'm just throwing this out there as food for thought.
Well, unless Ian has any objections, we can just move forward with type for now.
No objection for me.
Okay.
One question, I know beating a dead horse a little bit here, but when you talk about those properties normally, what's the noun for them? How do you normally refer to them?
The property taxonomy.
Yeah.
That's what we refer to. Yep.
So you just call it the property taxonomy?
Mhm.
Then why don't we just call this evidence property taxonomy? Because if that's how it's referred to in the rest of the spec, we should try to keep that.
So this is the taxonomy, and the taxonomy is everything. Obviously, we're not asking for everything here.
Right,
We're
but is it
asking for one
taxonomy ID?
thing.
Is it a unique ID in the taxonomy, and that's how we refer to it?
Yes, it is.
Or is
So
it a taxonomy type? Right. You see what I'm trying to ask? What's the generic noun you use to refer to this?
right. Let's see. What is it called in the spec? Namespaces and properties. Namespace. Yeah, properties.
Property, namespace, and name taxonomy.
Yeah. Yep. So the property name is the whole thing. So you got the namespace : name. Yeah.
Yeah, then I'd probably just call it property name.
Property name.
And I would update the other one where you have revisited in 1.7. I would also call that property name, just so we can, when the time comes,
We'll know that. Yeah. Okay. Let's see. This was here. Let me change it in the schema. Where's my evidence?
And sorry if I'm being a little pedantic with some of these questions, but I think this is
No,
the,
it's all
this is where
good.
it gets really weird and interesting.
All good. Okay, so this is now called property name in the schema. Okay. And who wants to take the first shot at a description for this field?
What's it called in the spec?
Let's see.
The reference to the CDX property name, property taxonomy name.
Does that make
And-
sense?
Yes. Question on this from a usability perspective.
Mhm.
If the descriptions here, right, are going to be used to actually generate the schema, to make them very usable, is there an option to have a link out? So
Yes.
for example, here I think that we should link to the CycloneDX property taxonomy so that people can see immediately what they're using. Because if they're writing the schema out somehow, that to me is highly useful, right? It makes the documentation even more useful.
Yep. Agreed.
And I think we should do that anywhere in the spec where there's an option to link out. That makes the documentation, it makes the linting, and makes everything so much more useful to be able to have that kind of thing.
Okay. So now let's see. All right, very good. Nice thing with the can't do it necessarily in our tool that generates the XML human readable docs, but I can do it for the JSON one, and that just uses Markdown, so it's easy.
Awesome.
Okay, cool.
I was
Good
doing some work
suggestion.
in was doing some work in VS Code the other day when we were when I was using TypeScript, and having those type helpers with actual links to the documentation was invaluable.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I just put the same description up there and then keeping that. So at least we can come back to that and know exactly what the hell we were thinking about. Okay. Good. All right. Let me where do we want to start
Question. Hang
doing
on 1 second.
this? Yeah.
I just noticed there on line 35, the conformance of the claim within 0,1, shouldn't it be 0-1? 0,1 makes me immediately think that it's one or the other, not that it's the range between the two, and that directly determines the data type. Like, is this a int, or is this a double? I know the goal is for that 100% or not, but within 0,1, just that seems like a very odd way to put that.
Yeah, that language is originates for me. I wasn't sure how best to say, but we want to be like it's a range that includes
Yeah.
0 and finishes with 1. And if I remember, this is my elementary school trying to remember, but like set theory, right? Where if you have a square bracket like that, it's inclusive of 0 and 1, versus if you have like something else, it would not.
Right, but with normal regex, isn't it 0-1 if you want to make the claim between the two inclusive?
Okay,
I don't remember. I just
Sure.
noticed that as I was skimming through, so figured I'd call it out.
yeah, that makes sense.
You
I
could
mean, I
also
can see it being. Let's do that then.
You could also just say claim between 0 and 1 inclusive. Like that's the other simple way to do it too.
Sure.
I'm just trying to put on my idiot hat right now. Like, if I had no context coming into this, what makes the most sense versus not?
Sure. Yeah, I could see someone looking at it as a discrete set of numbers and it's only
Mhm.
1 or 0, because that's what's included. Yeah.
If the target audience was only engineers, I'd say yes, absolutely. But there's auditors in here too. And I'm not going to make generic comments about auditors, but I'm not sure if we use that elsewhere, that terminology with the brackets. Yeah, down there on 39, it's the same thing.
Does that make sense? Does that read well? Okay. And this is confidence.
It is a little bit wordy, but at the same time, like it's clear to me.
Right. Okay, let me change that on the schema. Let's see. The conformance. Okay, and the other one is here. This is the confidence. Okay, all right. They've both been changed in the schema as well.
Can you just do a search for the open bracket here, and let's see if we're using open bracket 0 maybe. See if we're using that anywhere else.
No.
Cool.
No. Okay. All right. Let me go ahead and let me go ahead and check these changes in. Okay, those changes have been committed. GitHub is just really slow today for some reason. There we go. Okay. Okay, so those changes have been committed. Now, going back to the actual types, then, where were they? We can start. I mean, we don't have to flesh them out entirely 100%, but we can at least start on that while it's kind of top of mind. Be the best way to do this.
Another tab in the Excel sheet.
Yeah, let's actually do that. Good idea. And we'll call this what are these evidence types, property types.
Names. Isn't it names if it's in the
Yeah,
taxonomy?
property names. Yep, you're right. Okay, so we're probably going to end up with a namespace like something like CDX. Actually, this could be. It's not specific to attestations at all. It's just different types of evidence. And then audit. And then we can come up with a description for that. observation. Do we want to keep these?
I think that's a good spot. So just looking at the time, we've only got a few minutes left. I think that this is a good spot to start with, but then the next meeting, we can have a deep dive into these property names explicitly.
Yeah. Okay. No, that sounds like a good plan. Okay, good. So we got that started.
It also almost
And
feels like there should be metadata around that, to be honest, like a little bit more open-ended tagging. So you could do things like system generated, or primary or secondary. Like it feels like maybe we're trying to overload this one term with too many things, and that we've got the first chunk of it here with the property name. But I think some of that stuff that we were bringing up earlier around, like, is it primary evidence? Is it secondary? Like, what's the degree of validity of the evidence?
maybe that field turns into an object instead of a field, right? Maybe.
Or multiple fields, maybe, because
Yeah.
I think either of those would work. But
Mhm.
I do think we should revisit that part of it as well, because I
Okay.
think that point was very salient.
Yeah. I'm thinking that this right here should be an attachment, not an external reference. The attachment, let me just show you kind of what this looks like. Let's see. So the attachment can, yeah, this is the description. This is how it's kind of used in elsewhere in the spec. So the attachment can have, content type, the different encoding, and of course the actual content of the attachment. So if you wanted to inline something, you could do that. But you could also specify the URL to maybe someplace else that it's hosted. So if we wanted to support like analog signatures, like somebody actually signing a piece of paper and then scanning that in, we could inline that signature. We could also specify a URL to where that signature is. The other thing that we could do is external reference also has, does it have one? I think it has one. I think it has a signature, CycloneDX, let's see, overview, no, documentation, external references, types, no, it doesn't. Mm-mm. So I'm thinking this maybe can be an attachment rather than an external reference. We don't have to decide today, but
What would be the benefit? Is it just to make it more self-contained,
yeah,
or is it okay?
yeah.
Yeah, and technically, I mean, this could also be a digital signature as much as a paper signature at that point. The only thing that I'm a little
Well, we support the digital signature, so the choice is a digital signature or an external reference and organization today. So let's go. Where is it? Signatories, right?
the only thing that I would be a little hesitant on, this is not a required field, right? This is an optional one, but
Yep.
usually people sign off on like one entire audit or one batch of work, right? So I would just worry that this should be a reference of some kind for sure, and not necessarily inline, because I don't really see a world where every piece of evidence is going to have a signature, or even individual pieces of evidence necessarily having some kind of a
No, this is not the evidence. This is the affirmation. So this is
apologies.
way up high. This is
Yeah,
way
no,
up high.
that totally makes sense then. Sorry.
Yeah, no worries. No
My
worries.
context hadn't updated yet.
Yeah, so we've got a statement of the what do we call it? Affirmation.
Yep.
And then we've got signatories, and the signatory has a name, a role, and then based on here, you can either have a digital signature or you can have an external reference along with the organization specified.
Yep.
So my thought was, instead of an external reference, this might be better as an attachment with the possible URL as well.
Yeah, I like that. I think that gives a little bit better optionality there.
Any thoughts, objections, Ian?
On one side, I think, well, for a layperson who's gonna be interacting with this, a reference, an external reference makes sense, but at the same time, no. The entire purpose of this is to cryptographically assign all of this data, so they should know how to be able to manipulate this stuff. So
Yeah,
I think it makes sense.
Okay. All right. I'll go ahead and make that minor update as well, and then check that in. And yeah, I think we made a ton of progress today. So thank you all for contributing. I appreciate it. All right. With that, have a great rest of your day. I'll talk to you soon.
Awesome. Take care.
All right.
Bye.
Cheers.